You owe US $75,000 for bringing you to this country, my mother announced on my 11th birthday, sliding a handwritten ledger across the kitchen table that itemized my debt, immigration lawyer fees, plane tickets, visa processing, and a mysterious opportunity cost that somehow exceeded everything else combined. Starting tomorrow, you work in the store. Every hour goes toward what you owe. When the debt is paid, you can have your own money. I stared at the numbers, my birthday cake untouched, my childish mind trying to comprehend how I'd been transformed from daughter into debtor in the space of a single sentence. But what I couldn't have known then, what would take 7 years of unpaid labor to discover, was that the ledger was only the beginning of my parents' lies. And the family business I'd sacrificed my childhood for was built on fraud that would eventually bring everything crashing down. Let me tell you about the debt that wasn't real and the discovery that set me free. We came to America when I was 9. My parents, David and Margaret Huang, had immigrated from Taiwan with dreams that sounded beautiful when they described them: opportunity, education, a better life for their only daughter. We settled in a small city in California, where they opened a convenience store in a working-class neighborhood. The first 2 years were what I thought normal looked like. I went to school, struggled with English, gradually made friends. I helped in the store sometimes, the way children help, stocking shelves, sweeping floors, the kind of contribution that felt like participation rather than obligation. Then I turned 11, and everything changed. The ledger appeared without warning. My mother had been tracking expenses since before we left Taiwan, apparently. Every dollar spent on immigration, lawyers, documents, travel, the apartment deposit, the store's startup costs, was assigned to my account. The logic, she explained, was cultural. In our family, children repay what parents sacrifice. This is how it works. This is how we honor what we've been given. But I was 9 when we came here. I didn't choose. You benefited. You owe. My father nodded from behind his newspaper. The discussion was over. The work schedule began immediately. Every day after school, I reported to the store. 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. on weekdays, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. on weekends. During summers, I worked from open to close, 14-hour days that blurred together into one endless shift. I worked the register, stocked inventory, cleaned bathrooms, mopped floors. I dealt with shoplifters and difficult customers, handled deliveries, and managed the lottery machine that seemed more popular than anything we actually sold. My parents paid me nothing. The debt, my mother would say whenever I asked. Every hour reduces what you owe. I tracked the hours in a notebook I kept hidden under my mattress. By age 13, I'd worked approximately 4,000 hours. Interest, she explained. You're also paying interest. Nothing in life is free. School became my escape. I was exhausted constantly, falling asleep in classes, struggling to complete homework during my 15-minute lunch breaks at the store. But school was the only place I wasn't a debtor, wasn't a worker, wasn't a disappointment for existing. I threw myself into academics with the desperation of someone who understood that education was the only door that might open. My teachers noticed. Some tried to help. "Sophie, you seem tired all the time," my 10th grade English teacher, Mrs. Patterson, observed. "Is everything okay at home?" "I work at my parents' store. To help the family." "How many hours?" I hesitated. Admitting the truth felt like betrayal. "A lot." She wanted to pursue it, I could tell. But I'd learned early that involving outsiders made home life worse. My parents would be humiliated, furious, and I'd still owe the debt. Better to stay quiet and work toward freedom. I graduated valedictorian at 17. The achievement was built on stolen hours, studying at the store during slow periods, reading textbooks while restocking shelves, memorizing formulas during my walks between school and work. I'd maintained a 4.3 GPA while working 80 hours per week, a feat that should have been impossible. The scholarship offers came flooding in. Full ride to UC Berkeley. Full ride to UCLA. Partial scholarships to Stanford and several Ivy League schools. My guidance counselor cried when she told me about the options. "Sophie, you did it. You're going to have an incredible future." I applied to Berkeley. The acceptance came with a $23,000 annual scholarship, renewable for 4 years. My parents cashed the first check before I ever saw it. "This goes toward what you owe," my mother explained, the scholarship disbursement already deposited into their account. "That money is for college. For tuition. We'll pay the tuition. The scholarship is repayment." "But I earned that. With my grades. My work." "You earned it because we brought you here. Because we gave you opportunity. Without us, you'd be nobody in Taiwan." She closed her ledger. "You still owe $52,000. When it's paid, you can keep what you earn." I was 17 years old. I'd worked approximately 25,000 hours over 7 years. I'd graduated top of my class. And according to my parents, I was still $52,000 in debt for the crime of being born and the offense of being brought to America. That night, I didn't cry. I started planning. College changed everything. Away from my parents' constant surveillance, I began to understand how abnormal my childhood had been. Roommates talked about allowances, summer jobs where they kept their wages, parents who supported them financially without expecting repayment. I took an accounting class freshman year and learned about financial record keeping. The forensic accounting professor, Dr. Marcus Webb, mentioned during a lecture that family businesses were often investigated for tax irregularities. Something clicked. Dr. Webb, I asked after class, if someone suspected their family's business wasn't reporting things correctly, how would they investigate? He looked at me with the careful attention of someone who recognized there was more to the question. They'd start by requesting public records. Business licenses, tax filings, anything in the public domain. Then they'd look for discrepancies. What kind of discrepancies? Income that doesn't match reported revenue. Employees who aren't on payroll. Cash transactions that exceed what the business type would normally generate. I nodded slowly. Thank you, Sophie. He paused. If you need to talk about something specific, my office hours are Tuesdays and Thursdays. I started investigating during winter break of sophomore year. The store's business license was public record. So were the tax filings my parents submitted annually. I pulled everything I could access legally, spreading documents across my dorm room floor like evidence in a crime drama. The first discrepancy was obvious. The store's reported income didn't match what I'd witnessed during 7 years of working there. We'd been busy, lottery sales alone should have generated significant revenue, but the tax returns showed a business barely breaking even. The second discrepancy was more disturbing. No employees were ever reported. Not one. The store had been staffed almost entirely by me for 7 years, and I'd never appeared on any payroll, never been issued a W-2, never existed in any official capacity. The third discrepancy explained everything. My parents were reporting enormous family expenses that coincidentally matched my supposed debt. Immigration costs, education expenses, child-rearing costs, all deducted as business expenses, reducing their tax liability while simultaneously creating the ledger they used to justify my unpaid labor. They'd invented the debt to keep me working. And they'd used that invented debt to commit tax fraud. Dr. Webb connected me with a forensic accountant. Gerald Morrison had spent 30 years investigating financial crimes. He agreed to review my documentation pro bono after I explained my situation. This is unfortunately common, he said, examining the records I'd compiled. First-generation immigrant parents, traditional ideas about family obligation, combined with American tax code complexity. Sometimes it's ignorance. Sometimes it's intentional fraud. Which is this? He was quiet for a long moment. The pattern of deductions is too systematic to be accidental. They've been claiming you as a business expense while never reporting you as an employee. They've been deducting your supposed debt payments while simultaneously keeping the scholarship money that should offset the debt. He shook his head. This is intentional fraud that's been ongoing for 7 years. What happens now? That depends on you. We can report this to the IRS, which would trigger an investigation that might result in criminal charges. Or you can use this information privately to renegotiate your relationship with your parents. He looked at me directly. What do you want to do? I thought about the question. About the childhood I'd lost. About the $75,000 debt that was never real. About the scholarship money that had been stolen. I want the truth to matter, I finally said. Whatever that means. I confronted my parents during spring break of junior year. I brought documentation, everything I'd compiled, everything Gerald had analyzed. I laid it out on the same kitchen table where they first presented my debt ledger 6 years earlier. There are 2 ways this can go, I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. You can acknowledge that the debt was fabricated, return my scholarship money, and we can negotiate what a real family relationship might look like. Or I can report everything to the IRS, and they'll investigate the tax fraud you've been committing since we arrived in this country. My mother's face had gone pale. My father's newspaper lowered slowly. You're threatening your own parents, my mother managed. You stole my childhood. You stole my money. You used me as unpaid labor and called it family obligation while claiming me as a tax deduction. I slid the documents toward her. The debt was never real. You invented it to control me. And now that I can prove it, we're going to have an honest conversation for the first time in 7 years. The negotiation took 3 hours. My parents tried denial first, the documents were misunderstood, the accounting was complicated, I was being ungrateful for everything they'd sacrificed. When I remained unmoved, they tried guilt. How could I threaten the family that brought me to America, gave me opportunity, loved me in their own way? You had me working 80 hours a week at age 11, I replied. You told me I owed $75,000 for existing. You cashed my scholarship checks without permission. That's not love. That's exploitation with extra steps. Finally, exhausted, they shifted to bargaining. The scholarship money, approximately $46,000 over 2 years, would be returned to me. My debt would be considered paid in full. They would stop claiming me as a business expense, which would require amending 7 years of tax returns and likely trigger IRS scrutiny regardless. In exchange, I wouldn't report them for fraud. I didn't report them. Not exactly. What I did was consult with Gerald about how to document everything properly, then put that documentation in a secure location. If my parents ever tried to claim I owed them anything again, if they ever contacted scholarship offices or financial aid departments to interfere with my education, the information would be released. It was leverage. Insurance. The kind of protection I'd never had as a child. The tax amendments triggered an audit anyway. 7 years of returns showing a business with no employees, huge family expense deductions, and suspicious cash flow patterns attracted IRS attention regardless of whether I reported anything. The investigation lasted 18 months. My parents were assessed approximately $127,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest. They weren't charged criminally, first-time offenders, cooperative with investigators, willing to enter a payment plan. But the business they'd built on my unpaid labor was effectively destroyed. The store closed. They had to sell the building to satisfy the tax debt. I watched from a distance. I'd provided documentation when the IRS requested it, answered questions honestly, and otherwise stayed out of the process I'd inadvertently triggered. Justice isn't always clean. Sometimes it's just consequences arriving. I graduated from Berkeley with honors. My scholarship money, returned by my parents under our agreement, had been invested during junior and senior year. Combined with a part-time job where I actually kept my wages, I graduated debt-free for the first time in my life. The irony wasn't lost on me. The childhood debt that was never real had been paid in full with labor worth far more than $75,000. The scholarship debt that was actually mine had been eliminated through my own efforts. I was free. Really, actually free. Graduate school followed. Then a career. I became a forensic accountant myself, drawn to work that exposed exactly the kind of fraud my parents had committed. I specialized in labor violations and child exploitation cases, helping investigators understand the financial patterns that indicated abuse. The work felt meaningful. Redemptive, maybe. Every case I helped crack was another child who might escape what I'd experienced. My relationship with my parents is complicated. We don't speak often, holidays, occasional phone calls, the minimal contact that maintains the appearance of family without the substance of it. They've never apologized, not really. In their minds, they were doing what families do, following traditions that justified everything. But they don't ask me for money. They don't claim I owe them anything. They've learned that I have documentation, leverage, the power to destroy them if they push too hard. It's not reconciliation. It's détente. The best I can manage with people who saw me as an asset to be exploited rather than a child to be loved. I speak at conferences now about labor exploitation in immigrant families. The first time I told my story publicly, I expected judgment. How could you turn on your parents? Don't you understand their sacrifices? Aren't you grateful for America? Instead, I received hundreds of messages from people who'd experienced the same thing. Children who'd worked in family businesses without pay. Young adults still being told they owed impossible debts. Immigrants trapped in cycles of obligation that looked like love but felt like prison. You're not alone, I tell them. And you don't owe anyone your entire life. Last year, a young woman contacted me. She was 16, working 60 hours a week in her family's restaurant, being told she owed $90,000 for being brought to America. Her story was my story, almost word for word. I helped her, connected her with resources, explained her rights, showed her how to document what was happening. When she turned 18, she used that documentation to negotiate her freedom, just as I had. Thank you, she told me when it was over. I didn't know I was allowed to want something different. Neither did I replied. But now we both know. And we can help others know too. The debt was never real. I say that to myself sometimes, when memories surface of those exhausted years, the teenage girl falling asleep over homework at 11 p.m., the child who didn't understand why her birthday meant servitude instead of celebration. The debt was never real. My labor was real. My lost childhood was real. My eventual freedom was real. But the $75,000 my parents claimed I owed for existing? For being brought to a country I didn't choose, to serve in a business I didn't own, to sacrifice years I'll never get back? That was a fiction. A control mechanism. A lie dressed up in cultural tradition to justify exploitation. I'm 34 now. I own a home, purchased with money I earned and kept. I have savings, investments, a career I built through my own effort. I have friends who know my story and love me anyway, a therapist who helps me untangle the complicated feelings that never quite resolve. I don't have children yet. Maybe someday. But if I do, they will never hear that they owe me for their existence. They will never work to pay off fabricated debts. They will know, from their first breath, that love isn't transactional and family isn't servitude. That's the promise I make to them before they exist. That's the cycle I'm determined to break. My parents are older now. Diminished. The IRS audit aged them, I think. The loss of the store, the business they'd built on my back, broke something in them. They live in a small apartment, surviving on Social Security and whatever they managed to save before everything collapsed. Sometimes I feel guilty about that. Then I remember the 11-year-old sitting at a kitchen table, being told she owed $75,000 for the crime of being born. I didn't create their problems. I just stopped being the solution to them. The ledger still exists somewhere. That handwritten record of my supposed debt, with its careful columns and fabricated line items. My mother kept everything, organized everything, believed in the legitimacy of her accounting even as it was exposed as fraud. I don't want to see it again. But I'm glad it exists. Evidence that what happened was real. That my memories aren't exaggerated. That a child was really told she owed her parents for bringing her to America, and that child worked 25,000 hours to pay a debt that was never legitimate. The ledger is proof. And proof is how I finally got free.